China and Ukraine signed a deal to jointly import Ukraine's peas and wild aquatic products. Surprisingly, Chinese domestic media hyped it up big time, showing no signs of news censorship whatsoever. Clearly, this info hype got the official nod, sparking heated debates among Chinese netizens. Plenty of folks think it's a signal that China might be looking to cozy up to Ukraine. Even some less radical netizens said it's about time to back the Ukrainian people against Russia's aggression. But in reality, keeping a quasi-ally tie with Russia is still the backbone of China's current diplomacy. Making sure Russia doesn't get crushed by NATO is the key to China securing a stable development space. Now, though, there's a massive wildcard: U.S. President Trump. Trump's your classic businessman type. With Musk's backing, he's slashed through American society with bold reforms. At the same time, he's busy wrangling allies, squeezing more profits for the U.S. Of course, what he's most jazzed about is patching things up with his old idol, Putin. For that, he's willing to risk a split with European allies, humiliating Ukraine and Zelensky, forcing Ukraine to cave to Russia. Truth is, China's got little faith in Russia. If Trump dangles enough goodies, there's no guarantee Russia won't turn its guns around. China's support for Russia was never some brotherly bond. It's pure, cold national strategy. Some Chinese folks online dream of teaming up with Russia against the U.S., even nursing a thick Soviet nostalgia. But most social elites feel for Ukraine, since China's the biggest victim of Russia's expansionism. Back in the 19th century, Tsarist Russia pounced when China was weak, forcing the Qing government into the Treaty of Agen and Treaty of Peking, gobbling up 1.5 million square kilometers of China's outer northeast and northwest. In those occupied zones, Tsarist Russia drove out and massacred Chinese residents, leaving a trail of bloody atrocities. To this day, Chinese people can't forget their lost homeland or the compatriots who died. China's maps still mark Russian-held cities with their old names. The resentment toward Russia runs deep, hard to shake off. No matter how Western media smears it, Chinese people actually hold the UN Charter in high regard, pushing for conflict resolution within the UN framework. China doesn't like the strong bullying the weak. In Chinese culture, picking on the helpless is a disgrace. Winning that way brings no honor. So when the Ukraine war kicked off, Chinese folks widely condemned Russia's invasion. But political needs meant those online takes got heavily censored. The Chinese government sees the crisis clear. If Russia collapses, China's next on the Western world's hit list. Russia's excuse for invading Ukraine, NATO breaking its promise not to expand east, got some buy-in from China's government. Ukraine, under Zelensky, went full populist, stoking anti-Russia vibes, even freezing Chinese firms' assets and ripping up the Motor Sich acquisition deal. China's government figures it can't fuel the West's color revolution antics. It's got to give Russia a hand. With Russia under full Western sanctions and isolation, its piles of resources can't find buyers. Exactly what China needs for energy security. China can snag cheap oil, gas, and minerals from Russia, boosting its strategic wiggle room, locking down domestic economic growth needs. Plus, with Western firms bailing on Russia en masse, slapping it with unprecedented embargoes, Chinese companies can step in, ramp up exports, offsetting the economic heat from the U.S.-China trade war. Russia's planned blitzkrieg overestimated its own muscle, got stuck in a long slog, and panic started brewing inside. China's hefty support gave Putin more swagger, letting him calmly shift Russia into a semi-war state, pumping out tons of frontline ammo and drafting more troops. Yet when aid hopes spiked and Russia's pressure hit its peak, Putin wanted more from China, only to get a no. Because China doesn't want to be tagged as backing Russia's aggression, it'd dent the moral ground for solving the Taiwan issue. So Putin cozied up to North Korea, scoring heaps of troops and ammo. That's why Putin publicly sings Sino-Russian friendship tunes. But deep down, he's got gripes with China. If Trump can force Ukraine to quit fighting, letting Putin digest eastern Ukraine and Crimea, Russia's national strength could bounce back fast, leveling up. At that point, with Putin's style, cutting a deal with the US for more perks is totally on the table. That's Trump's dream scenario, teaming up with idle Putin to smack down China, his biggest rival. But Trump's too naive. After decades of Cold War standoffs and domestic political correctness, anti-Russia sentiment's the mainstream in the US. Tough to flip short-term. Western allies, especially in Europe, have long seen Russia as the main bogeyman under NATO's shield. Generations of anti-Russia schooling mean European nations won't stomach joining Russia against China. If the US dares ditch NATO, or even the UN, going full isolationist and unilateral, it'd hand Europe a historic shot. France and Germany would bulk up their militaries, with France's nukes plus Germany's tech and economic clout. The EU could fast-track integration into a quasi-state, a nightmare for Americans. The EU's 450 million people outnumber the US's 350 million, triple Russia's count. Once the EU shakes off US shackles and grows on its own, the US faces another foe as scary as China. And if Russia dares buddy up with the US, China'd instantly arm Ukraine again, letting Russia taste the world factory's terrifying power. It's not just Europe. Japan and South Korea are itching too. Japan's PM Ishiba flat out rejected Trump's blackmail, saying Japan's military budget is its own call, not up to foreign orders. He's loudly backing Ukraine, upping aid. If the US pulls a strategic retreat now, sacrificing Ukraine, Japan, South Korea, Europe, and others might eye their own nukes, ditching reliance on the US. Lose those key allies, and the US has no shot at propping up dollar dominance. With the dollar crashing, the US economy tanks hard. Forget leading the world. Even being a regional power gets dicey. After all, the US has been deindustrialized for decades, hooked on reaping other nations, long forgetting how to live off its own labor. The US might face another headache. Japan took 2 US atomic bombs. If it goes militarily independent, sliding back to militarism, the US might not be safer than China. Beyond that, the US has sparked wars globally for years, racking up countless enemies. Drop world leadership, and the payback the US could face is unthinkable. Honestly, Biden's memory's shot, reaction slow. He shouldn't have egged Ukraine on against Russia. But at least he gets maintaining US traditional values, teaming up with allies. Trump's blackmailing allies, selling out Ukraine. Beyond short-term gains, the likeliest outcome is torching the US's foundation as world leader. Once the US is isolated, facing China one-on-one, it's got next to no chance. When Trump gripes that NATO and Western allies mooch off the US, has he thought, without those allies, could the US be world leader? Could the dollar be global currency? Without that dollar status, could the US keep offloading economic crises, staying prosperous long-term? Wanting to lead the world but dodging the tab. Where's that kind of deal in this world?